Hello class, welcome to our presentation, Introduction to Early Greek Philosophy. So in this presentation, we will address the question, who were the early Greek philosophers? We will talk about the two reasons for studying the early Greeks, and then we will review the two major schools of thought. So who were the early Greek philosophers? So the early Greeks, also known as the pre-Socratics, were a group of Greek philosophers who lived before the philosopher Socrates. So what do we mean by the term Greek? Well, as we can see, we have a depiction here, or a map rather, of the Greek peninsula. And the early Greek philosophers actually not only lived on the Greek peninsula, but they also lived on the area known as Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey. And these were kind of like colonies of Greece at the time. And we also have a timeline right here. So here's Socrates. And then these here are the early Greek philosophers, people like Thales and Anaximenes and Anaximander, Zeno of Elea, etc. So as you can see, they were all kind of born before and kind of predated Socrates. And in case you're curious where Plato is, well, of course, we read his Allegory of the Cave last week. There he is preceding Socrates. Now, unlike Socrates, who was primarily concerned with ethics, the early Greeks were interested in metaphysical issues. So they were concerned with the following questions. What is the origin of the world? What is the nature of reality? What is the primary substance of the world? And does there exist a supreme being? Now, because the early Greeks relied upon reason and observation in analyzing the world, they are often referred to as proto-scientists, meaning the first scientists. That is, during the time of the pre-Socratics, it is believed that most ancient Greeks looked to mythology for answers concerning the nature of the world. So, for example, the Greek poet Hesiod in his Theogony gives a mythological explanation of the origin of the sun and the moon and the dawn. And this is what he writes. He says, Antheia was subject in love to Hyperion and bore the great Helios, or sun, and clear Selene, or moon, and Eos, or dawn, who shines upon all that are on earth and upon the deathless gods who live in the wide heaven. So according to Hesiod, the sun, the moon, and the dawn were created out of a love bond between Theia and Hyperion, or the gods Theia and Hyperion. But the early Greeks questioned these ancient Mediterranean answers as found in mythology and developed their own theories regarding the nature of the world. Now here's an issue to consider. There is a common attitude that the pre-Socratics completely rejected Greek mythology and instead appealed to purely scientific explanations of reality. Now, once you complete your study of the early Greeks, I want you to think, is this attitude true? Does it seem like the early Greeks completely rejected Greek mythology, or do they have a more complex or complicated relationship with the mythology of their time? Now, here's an issue to consider. As you read the theories of these early philosophers, you may find that many of them are frankly bizarre and, from a modern scientific view, majorly outdated. So why then are we bothering to study these early Greek philosophers? Well, we are doing so for two reasons. One is that it will reveal to us the beginnings of philosophy, which helps us to understand the nature of the discipline. So again, if you want to understand anything, why not start from the beginning? And secondly, it introduced major philosophical concepts and problems that are still debated today. So in other words, we still feel the impact of these ancient Greek philosophers. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I have divided our early Greek philosophers into two major schools of thought: the Naturalist School and the Supernaturalist School. So let's start with the Naturalist School. So according to naturalists, the material universe is the only reality. That is, the world of like sense, of touch and smell and taste, etc., This is it. This is the only reality or world that exists. There is nothing beyond it. As a result, how do we gain an understanding of reality? By using our senses. That is, we have no other choice. We live in a material world of sense perception, and we must use our senses to understand it. Now, there are two sub-schools within the Naturalist School, material monism and pluralism. And according to material monists, there exists one ultimate material substance. Now, what does that mean? Well, we'll get into it in the next slide show. But just be aware that people like Thales, Anaximenes, Heraclitus, and Anaximander belong to this school of thought. And then secondly, we have pluralists, or those who argue that there exist many ultimate substances, not just one. So people like Empedocles, Democritus, and Anaxagoras are part of this school. Now, in terms of the supernaturalist school, supernaturalists argue that there exists an ultimate supernatural reality or realities, which is or are beyond sense experience. So in other words, the world of senses that we interact with every day, this is not the only reality that exists. There is more out there than meets the eye, literally. So some are going to argue that there exists alternate realities, or realities that are more real than this one, that exist beyond the senses. So because there exist these supernatural realities beyond the senses, supernaturalists argue that human beings should use what is called pure reason over sense experience if you want to understand metaphysics. So in this case, using like pure logic, pure mathematical reasoning, for example, are the methods preferred by supernaturalists. And within the supernaturalist school, we have two sub-schools, absolute monism and dualism. Absolute monists argue that there exists one supernatural reality beyond the senses. So people like Parmenides and Zeno are going to argue that the material world that we live in is an illusion, that what is truly real lies beyond what we think is this world. And then we have dualists, or those who believe that there exist two independent yet interacting realities, one natural and one supernatural. And of course, people like Pythagoras and Plato are going to argue this position. Now, if you do not fully grasp these different schools of thought, do not worry. We are going to talk about each subset in our following presentations.